2025, relative to the appointments of Charlise Smith, Jala Rucker, and Wasiullah Mohamed as members of the Housing Authority, City of Pittsburgh Board of Directors. Would the clerk please read the title of the bill?
Bill 1613, Resolution appointing Charlise Smith as a member of the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh Board of Directors with the term to expire March 26, 2029. Bill 1614, Resolution reappointing Jala Rucker as a member of the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh Board of Directors with the term to expire December 31st, 2028. And Bill 1615, Resolution appointing Wasiullah Mohamed as a member of the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh Board of Directors with the term to expire December 31st, 2029.
If we could have all three come to the table. Thank you all for being here with us today. For the record, we're currently joined by Councilwoman Barbara Warwick. I certainly expect other members to trickle in. If maybe we could start with Ms. Rucker, if you could introduce yourself, say a little bit about why you're interested or excited to serve, well, to be reappointed to the Housing Authority Board, and then we'll go down the line.
No, it's on.
I'm live.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jala, Jala, last name Rucker, Rucker. Co-chair of the Housing Justice Table, and I'm also the vice chair of City of Pittsburgh Housing Authority. I'm honored to be reappointed to the Housing Authority, and what I can say is that pretty much my work has spoken for itself throughout this city and this county when it comes to advocating for our tenants. That's pretty much all I have to say here.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for the opportunity to serve. My name is Charlise Smith, Charlise. I am the founder and executive director of WAVE. We are a PHFA and HUD certified housing counseling agency. Our agency receives a lot of calls in reference to the City of Pittsburgh Housing Authority. We have acted as a liaison between both tenants as well as landlords to help resolve several issues. In my background, I've been in this industry for almost 25 years. So I am definitely looking forward to serving our community.
Thank you. Ms. Mohammed?
Wasiullah Mohamed, W-A-S-A, last name Mohamed, M-O-H-A-M-E-D. I'm Chief of Staff for the Congresswoman Summer Lee right now. Beforehand, I was at the Pittsburgh Foundation as a Senior Policy Officer and at the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh. And I think my experience with housing policy and housing justice work kind of really deepened whenever I was at the Islamic Center and realizing how difficult it was when folks did not have safe, stable, affordable housing, and how that negatively impacted every other aspect of their life, whether it's the, getting stable relationships and community, making sure their kids can stay in school, making sure that they're healthy. You take away the housing piece and it really creates a negative impact that spirals and gets much worse. So it's something that's been a passion of mine since then in the last 10 years in progressive, whether it's working directly, giving, financial aid to folks looking for support in housing and eviction work at the Islamic Center, to my time at the Pittsburgh Foundation, where I also worked on housing policy at the local and state level, at my time with right now the Congressman's office, in which we're working with federal policy at that level. It's just always been something that we've been deeply passionate about and been working with community on in a lot of other ways. But thank you for inviting us today. Thank you.
Very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to council members who may have questions or thoughts, and I'll begin with Councilman Warwick.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all so much for being here and for, your willingness to serve on the Housing Authority. It's definitely an important agency here at the city, which I would say probably arguably has the most impact on some of our most underserved residents. We've talked a lot about the Housing Authority, some of the issues at the Housing Authority over the past couple of years, at least. And I know, Jayla, we've worked together with tenants at Glen Hazel, you and my office. So I just wanted to kind of go through some of the issues that I've seen, and I think we've all are familiar with, right, outstanding, and kind of get your thoughts just as new board members about ways that the Housing Authority can better address, these sort of ongoing issues. So the first one, and Jayla, is sort of accountability of management companies that are running. They are Housing Authority properties, but they are being run by management companies. And I think we see a lot where there just isn't that accountability. It's like, oh, it's the management company. There's nothing we can do. So, whether that's work orders or just maintaining units or making sure that residents have the supports they need, if they're in arrears or whatever, just, they're getting consistent communication. Well, I'll just start with that, just with the sort of accountability of management companies.
So from just experience, I feel as though that for years the Housing Authority City of Pittsburgh has been trying to get out the business of being landlords. And I feel as though that's why they do a lot of these red conversions and these choice neighborhood programs. And they bring these private entities in, and these private entities, they are not familiar with the individuals who live in these communities. And of course, they're just there for one thing and one thing only, and I feel like that's just to collect money off the backs of poor people. But as we know, the management properties and the private entities, I think as though that it trickles down from a leadership. I feel as though the Housing Authority should have a better eye over who they choose to manage their properties, and also make sure that they have the resources and capacity to obtain those properties, and make sure that maintenance is addressed, how tenants are able to thrive within their units and communities. And I just feel as though that's been it's a lack, right? There's a lack right there in the communication.
Mm-hmm.
What I have observed over the years, I've been in this industry since 2002. In my first position, I was a property manager with the community builders, right, in East Liberty. And what I've observed over the years is that, one, when they moved the local HUD office, contract administrators from our downtown office, that had an impact on the eyes that we need on some of these affordable housing in our communities. Number two, what I observed now in my career, because we are a PHFA and HUD certified housing counseling agency, what I observed is at the Housing Authority City of Pittsburgh, there need to be some new infrastructure in place when it comes to onboarding families, accountability for the administrative work that needs to be done in order for families to be treated fairly when it comes to processes. We get a lot of phone calls that families are not getting their correct rents, recertifications not being accurately implemented, executed. We get a lot of calls in reference to deplorable conditions. I have several videos with families who have literally did virtual videos in their units, and they are not living in very healthy conditions. And until we figure out how we can have new leadership within the Housing Authority City of Pittsburgh, I do not foresee there being any changes anytime soon. And I also believe that this leadership should be someone who is familiar with the city of Pittsburgh, who can bring new innovative ideas to the city of Pittsburgh, and who we can have total infrastructure and visibility and accountability. I'm very familiar with quite a few slum landlords. I sit on calls every week with quite a few of my counterparts here, just trying to understand how we can come up with policies and strategies to hold these private landlords accountable when it comes to their vouchers, when it comes to site-based Section 8s, when it comes to LIHTC deals. We really need to focus on providing more infrastructure in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with my friends, and just to add briefly, I think, you know, and referencing the conversations we've had pretty consistently over the last year, couple of years, but particularly in the last year, you know, there's this understanding that the private property managers would just inherently do better, you know, like, and then unfortunately in a lot of the cases in our neighborhoods, we found that's not the case. And not only that, when that's not the case, is we found it's really difficult to do anything about it. Like, the recourse is slow. It's hard to get people, from the moment that you find out a landlord is a slumlord or isn't, you know, putting money back into the own, to the time that somebody will be living in safe, you know, conditions again. It's way too long. It's so difficult. And I think it isn't too much to ask from the housing authority to be able to effectively manage these properties and moving forward. So I do think we need to reevaluate that and see what's going on and better understand it, and just know that we've if the assumption was that if you bring in some of these private managers, immediately management will get better because of their scale and the more units they have, it just hasn't been the reality we've faced on the ground recently. So we do have to take a look at that again. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, some of this issue, my understanding is that, and you mentioned the HUD office being removed, and of course, we've heard recently that from the federal level, like local HUD offices are going to be reduced even further. So, you know, the issue is, of course, it's HUD paying the rent, and it's HUD that can withhold the rent. So where could the housing authority sort of insert itself in that process? I mean, just, you know, like, the housing authority can't withhold the rent, right? That's like in a voucher situation.
I think
where, like, what could the housing authority do to be sort of making sure that these units are maintained to the level that they are when they are first inspected and approved, right? Like, so, you know.
So what I think, Barb, and I've been saying this for a very long time, when it comes to the HAP assistance payments and then the residence portion, I feel as though that the housing authority should automatically have those HAP payments paid out directly to whoever the private owner is, if that tenant has a Section 8 voucher or LIHTC, and then whatever the residence portion is should come directly from the housing authority, and then the housing authority be accountable on their books for the residents to pay their portion directly to the housing authority. I think it would be more manageable to do so that way, just because the housing authority is the ones that come out and have their inspectors come to those units. They are the ones who do the interims. They are the ones that do the recertifications. HUD doesn't do that, right? So when these recertifications aren't done in a timely fashion, I think they're done once a year, but I think they have you come out like maybe 3 or 4 months before your actual recert is actually due for that year. And if residents doesn't make it to those appointments, or doesn't have their proof of income, or the day they last worked a job, or whatever it is, those documents to bring them into compliance, those HAP payments automatically stop, and then our market rate rent, which is the roof, is automatically pushed on our residents. I just think that shouldn't be happening. It's a way of them to continuously keep us folks down into poverty. We're not excelling, and there's other options that I feel as though could be pinpointed to our families as well, such as a lot of home ownership as well. And that's just not happening right now. And I've just been seeing it ongoing for years. I've been a housing authority resident since I was 18 years old. That's been 20 plus something years. And it's happened to me numerous times where rents aren't calculated right. So I just feel like there should be more oversight from the housing authority, and they should be on site. And that's why I feel as though they don't need to get out the business of being landlords, and they need to manage their own properties.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting idea. Oh, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
I just want to add something to that. Building a nonprofit and just my background in real estate, I understand the importance of partnerships, right? And based on my observation with the city of Pittsburgh and the number of phone calls that we get at our nonprofit organization, there needs to be some oversight on they're different departments. There may need to be subcontractors to come in and handle the recertifications that have expertise in the 4350. And just because the computer may shut down, they still should understand how to calculate families' rent by hand. Like, that's what we used to have to do back in the day. There was no excuse. Being held accountable with multifamily, you have PHFA, Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. They come out and they do management reviews on the multifamily buildings where you have to score, right? In order to be held accountable to show that you are calculating the rent correctly. And so those kind of policies and structure should be implemented in order. There's no solid oversight over the housing authority when it comes to regulations for residents, when it comes to housing inspections for some of these residents. And I think that will help filter some of the blind spots that we are not seeing and lessen some of the complaints if you kind of subcontract some of this work out in order to support the overall operations.
And I'll keep mine short. I agree with what they were saying as well. And I think every single day we're getting calls about the impacts of all of these HUD cuts on everybody and how terrible it's going to be. And one thing that's been clear as each agency has gotten hit and how surprising it is when a new part of a thing just stops working. Like, nobody's at a desk anymore, nobody's picking up a phone call, and we don't know exactly how that's going to harm us, right? Are we going to lose an office here? Are we going to lose resources here? Where are we going to go if our HACP needs to contact their HUD representatives? And also the added burden it's going to put on the housing authority. One thing that we talked about literally a couple of days ago, and we've been talking about for the last year, is that when you have these bad actor private landlords in the area, you know, like a lot of folks in all of your districts here are going to suffer, and the housing authority and the ACHA can play a role in alleviating that suffering, but like it has to be able to, you know, be executed and done. And we need to kind of come together and have these hard conversations. Like, what do we do if we see significant cuts in HUD funding? What do we do if we have significant issues reaching anybody at HUD anymore? These cuts are massive and significant, and I think everyone at the table would have a role working with us. Like was mentioned, partnerships. I think that's like a key word here. Every level of government and your city council offices, how are your tenants and how are your residents being impacted by this and what's happening, and us hearing from that and making sure that we can respond effectively and do what we can to, while that level of government is kind of going to be struggling, right? They're going to gut it and take so much away that it's obviously going to struggle. How can we ensure that we're working even better and closer with our local levels of government that might still be functioning better with the county and the state and whatever else we can do to be prepared? But I think communication and partnerships is key, and being ready for that and having a plan when some of this stuff is going to happen. We should make the plan now so that we won't be caught off guard when some of this stuff happens that we know is going to happen. Yeah.
That's an interesting idea about the tenants paying their rent to HACP.
I've been saying it for years, Barb.
Because, I mean, I feel like also so this is across the board, whether it's work orders or rent issues or whatever, is that it really feels like tenants, currently HACP is sort of like, you know, to the landlords, to the tenants, like, you're on your own, right? Like, this is your, like, we're just here with the voucher and that's it. But really our tenants and our landlords, but, you know, primarily our tenants need, I would say, like a caseworker, like a person that is their person that they are assigned to, you know, at the house. So to address all of these things. And
Right. Even
that's
with work
interesting.
orders, I feel like those work orders, even if you have a private landlord, that you should call in your maintenance work orders to your housing specialist at the Section 8 office.
Right. Yeah.
They're the ones who issue out your new raft of paperwork when you need to move into a new unit. Or if your landlord's evicting you and you need to find other housing options, you have to reach out to your housing specialist. So I think they're the ones that should be held accountable, that work hand in hand with the tenants alongside those private landlords, because I just think it would be more effective.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. The other thing I wanted to ask about is technology. So we've heard at various post agendas, especially around the project-based vouchers, where you have like a, you know what I mean, where it's like the vouchers attached to the unit. And I mean, I was sort of like jaw-dropping to me that there are, that the wait lists are somehow managed by paper. So it's like, you know, you have, let's just say you have 10 units ready to go, they're ready to, you know what I mean? And this wait list process where you're sending out a paper letter to someone and then waiting, I don't know how many days for them to respond. And then if they don't respond, like, so that these units are just sitting empty. And then technology also in terms of work orders and things like that, so that things can be tracked, so that it's like easy to just, you know, anybody can come in and look in the system and look at the tenant and be like, oh, this work order, that or work order, here's the status. The tenants can see it, just the transparency there.
It works
Any
like
thoughts
that with
around that?
public housing. In public housing, the work orders are called directly to the housing authority, and they do have a data track. And tenants, I'll say this all the time, we need to do more tenant workshops to give tenants the education they need to know their rights and responsibilities as being a leaseholder. Because when you call in these work orders, the housing authority, they automatically have a directive that gives out a work order number, but tenants don't know to ask for those work order numbers. Of course, I'm someone that does, because I've been trained to know to ask these certain type of questions. But they give out these work order numbers, and of course, these work order numbers, they sit in a database where the housing authority could track those, but that's for public housing only. That's not for private housing.
Right.
So if you're in LATAC or you have a PBV voucher or PBRA, I know I'm using all these, sorry. I'd like to say the words, public-based rental assistance and public-based voucher. Instead of using the acronyms, I like to say the word out loud. But there's no way to track it, because those individuals are just calling those their landlords. So there's no way for the housing authority to track it. And then these residents, they don't let the housing authority know that they have told their landlord that there's this and that and the third, because when they do, that house will fail inspection. And then they won't get their HAT payment. The HAT payment won't go out to the landlord because they can't pass inspection if these issues are not addressed, right? And the housing authority takes so long to send out one of their inspectors to inspect these units. And I think that's another reason why folks sit on those waiting lists so long. Mm-hmm. They give you 10 days to respond, and it's paper. It's all paper, like you said. They send you a letter in the mail. Hey, you came up on the wait list. We need your birth certificate, Social Security, and proof of income, and you have 10 days to respond. I think when you first apply for that initial unit, you should have to submit all those documents at that point right there, because then they already have all those things on file. And I just think it prohibits a lot of these residents from coming off the wait list, because then they do this weed and seed, I call it. They start going through people's backgrounds. They do credit checks. They do landlord-tenant checks. And if you owe a previous landlord, or your judgment from a previous landlord that took you to court has not been cured, then they will deny you from even getting into that certain program that you've applied for. I have attended several grievance hearings with HACP tenants, and that was the reason that we had a lot of these grievance hearings, because these tenants were automatically just denied right off of the waiting list from the start, because they had some things in their previous past with other landlords, or maybe some criminal history, or maybe one of their adult kids did something out in the community and their address on their ID was their parents' address. That is into grounds of removal, because now you're in violation of your lease, and that happens in public housing. And I just see it happening all the time. There's this big expulsion list that the housing authority has, and they just put people's names on it. They don't know who these individuals are, or able to ID these individuals. But how can you tell a family who should come and go from their home? And I just think we need to find better ways where we could track this data and be able to communicate effectively with our families and residents whom we serve.
Yeah.
I don't know how we do that, but I just feel as though it needs to be done.
Yeah, it sounds like there needs to really be some process analysis, right? Like deep dive process analysis on everything.
On everything. Absolutely.
And, I know there is a new CRM system, but also like what, how it's like really a deep dive, right, on how it's being used and if it's being used to capacity, if all the capabilities are the system at any rate. And the last point I want to raise, because I think this is a very important one, especially in the context of what we're talking about here at City Council around inclusionary zoning and, large-scale developers, market rate developers accepting vouchers. And because the reality is that, if there were landlords who would take the vouchers that folks have, thousands of vouchers that folks have in hand right now in Pittsburgh, it would be we could almost solve our affordable housing crisis just by getting landlords and developers to take the vouchers, to take the federal funding that people have in hand for rent. And, we know, of course, that there are stigma around voucher holders, right? There's, racism and, sort of just discrimination against those, who are in poverty. But there is also, and that's the reality at the Housing Authority, is the concern about the, these process issues, right? Like things, slowing things down, and it is something that our affordable housing developers also experience. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, thoughts around like ways that the Housing Authority could really improve services so that landlords, just any landlord, not just, ones in certain communities or who are, have, slumlords are just like, yeah, whatever, we just, but any landlord would be like, actually, this is a great way for me to get, because any landlord will tell you the hardest thing to do is to collect rent, right? So if you have rent that is automatically being paid every month through a program, that's a huge benefit. So what could the Housing Authority do to work better with developers and landlords to make it more appealing, right, to take those vouchers, whether it be project-based or tenant-based?
Leadership is everything. And the reason why I say that is, and just me being fully transparent, I'm a leader, right? And I had some craziness internally within my organization. And I had to have a consultant come in and interview my staff. And I had to be woman enough to accept what they needed to say. And it was important for me to change the culture of my organization, or I would not have a staff, right? So leadership is everything. We could come up with all the systems we want to, but if you don't have effective leadership that is willing to take a step back, do self-evaluation, and take a look at the partnerships around you, you're going to continue to have these fractured cycles and systems in place. Leadership, it's important for leadership to go visit other states to see how they're operating successful housing authorities, to see how they are operating, and then build a team around you to come up with strategic strategies. I mean, my staff was tired of paperwork. So what did I do? I invested into a CRM system. All of our clients, we do rental counseling by the masses. All of our clients literally click our website. They can upload, they can take a picture of all their documents. They're already there. So when the counselor calls to do rental counseling or to deal with some of the rental issues or home ownership, guess what? That's one less thing that they have to worry about paper chasing, right? And so if you're not going to be open to coming up with strategic strategies and then working with the developers, I receive so many calls from landlords because they know I don't have a problem with calling down the housing authority to current leadership and say, why are these landlords calling me saying that y'all haven't processed their paperwork? Right now, I'm on one name basis with these individuals, right? Because and I'm just being honest, this isn't rocket science. This is we got to be held accountable, or we're going to continue to be in this vicious cycle. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. But when you hear about your mistake, then you need to do something about it. And how dare our families suffer because you choose not to take, or you choose not to partner with organizations that are trying to support you, or you choose not to partner with developers who have ideas, who want to participate in our voucher program, but they wait 6-7 months to get a check. That's just the reality of it. We can come up with all the grand scheme of things, but if we don't come together and put our foot down on the neck of the people who are held accountable for this stuff, our families are going to continue to suffer. Everybody should know that 4350 handbook. Everybody in that housing authority. Everybody should know the financial policies of HUD. Those are the requirements in order for you to effectively be held accountable. So then when we see fraud, you can catch it. When you look at your third party verification, you could tell when things aren't right. When you look at, when she was talking about letters should go out within 120 days prior to recertification, and you look at the date of that letter, and it says January the 15th, well, HACP, you out of compliance because that letter should have went out January 1st. So it's really, and I'm just being honest, it's not that deep. It's just that we need to make some changes so that we can move the envelope and hold the tenants accountable. I'm not going to sit up here and just say it's just, leadership. Some residents have to be held accountable for the things that they are doing in order for them to understand that this is just not for you to sit here forever. There's some policies in place that families should have been out of their units because they're over the threshold of the AMI. They shouldn't even be there anymore. So now you're holding vouchers for other families who are affordable because during the tenure of their time there, they just sat there. Nobody held them accountable. And I'm not saying hold them accountable to the effect that we put them out or set them up for failure, but you put these partnerships around them so that they could be strategically transitioned out over a period of time. Believe me, there's tons of vouchers out there where people are living in units that are overhoused. So now you have other families who can't have the opportunity to live in affordable housing.
So,
I'm sorry.
No.
This is my thing. I love this work.
So that kind of is my last question is where does the board come into this? Because, a lot of boards at a lot of organizations kind of rubber stamp stuff and or kind of, and so how does the board make this happen?
I could say how I can make it happen. I don't believe in not holding people accountable and not standing up for the facts, right? And it doesn't mean you have to be nasty. It doesn't mean you have to be disrespectful, but let's get to a common ground so that we can figure out how we need to transition. And I'm not a board member that need any perks for being your friend. I'm a board member that I'm going to stand up for policies, procedures, and people. And that's just what it is. I don't want to be on a board to be your friend. I want to be on a board to have an impact on what's right, whether it's residents, whether it's the landlords. And that's just how I operate.
I think that we need to start over. We need to start from the ground and work our way back to the top as the board. We need to request a certain scope of work and request certain documents that go back from 10, maybe 20 years ago. And we start over and we have some tenant engagement as well, because those are the individuals that we really need to hear from because they should have a voice as well. They're the ones who have to live out in these communities amongst what's going on in their neighborhoods and with their families as well. So they know what's best for themselves. You know, we can support them, but a tenant knows what's best for their family, and they're the ones who got to drive the wheel. We just got to get them the supports that they need, and I feel as though that's something that the board needs to do, is we need to just start over from scratch and go through each and every document that is very important to the needs of the people whom we serve, and we figure out ways to implement progress and new systems.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, I mean, we're in the middle of like affordable housing crisis, right? Like we need the best version of the housing authority to exist like yesterday. So it's kind of, there's urgency here. And I think that this is not a time for a passive board, but a particularly active board. And I think the director should see the board as an ally, as folks that are in this process with them, and a source of support and partnership, but also a source of accountability. You know, that we're all put here for a reason, to kind of ensure that this deep process analysis happens, that this move towards a lot of these necessary changes are happening in a way that we can both be really supportive and you know, put a lot of pressure on folks to kind of make things move. Because we see it every day. We get pressure every day from the tenants and the residents and the landlords and the developers and like everybody, right? Like everybody wants to see this work, and it can work better. And I think that we have enough wonderful people in this city to make it happen. You know, it's just like, you know, there's got to be a couple people that put in a lot of time and effort to ensure we get to that next step. And I'm excited that these folks are stepping up right now, you know, to do that. Because I think it's not easy. I think everything we talked about so far, even much easier to say. It's going to take a lot of hard work to kind of implement and do over time. And I think I'm excited that folks are up for that challenge and are looking to it and not looking to sit on a board and rubber stamp, as you said. You know, I think it's really not the time for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman Mosley.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Good to see everyone again. I had a couple of follow-ups from Councilwoman Warwick, and then I have a few questions as well. Jala, you had spoken in particular about two instances, and you know the nomenclature, you know, much better than me. As your fellow board member, I lean on your expertise. As obviously as an activist, for good housing policy, but also, as you said, you've lived, in, public housing and social housing, the entirety of your adult life. So you had talked about one, application denials, for a range of issues, as well as the revoking the kind of gap funding, for lack of a better term, as someone pays 30% of their income, and then it's the gap funding is provided by the government, and then it gets revoked if paperwork isn't returned. Are now those housing authority policies, or are those HUD policies?
So those are HUD policies.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 96.3. That's Section 3 rules right there, for families to be in compliance in order for those HAP assistance payments to even go out. So that's something that HUD created.
Okay. And it's the same thing like with the application denials for like a credit issue, or like a previous issue of not paying rent, or somebody got arrested. Are those housing authority policies? Or
I think that's a housing authority policy. I think that's the way that they weed and seed families out, because of course when they launch those applications on their websites that stay open for maybe 7 to 10 business days, they get about 30 to 40,000 applicants that apply at one time, knowing that there's not 30 to 40,000 units out here for those families. So they have to do their weed and seed process as to how they deny individuals those applications.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And this is, for the group, I appreciate the insight that you brought, about the voucher program. The voucher program, comes up a lot because affordable housing advocates, say to developers, much like Councilwoman Warwick, take, vouchers, and then I'm in meetings with developers and say, oh, the process is too hard, or I even have, folks that aren't necessarily developers, but are property owners that are currently, I'm trying to be a liaison, between, conflict between property owners who, feel like, they either haven't got their check, or the check that they got doesn't match the services they provide and the housing they provided, for a voucher holder. So my question, because I think you've spoken at length about ideas, specifically from obviously, leadership issues as well as structural and programmatic issues. Are there, if particularly from your expertise or anyone at the table's expertise, do you know of voucher programs around the country that do very well and the type of voucher programs that we should be replicating, particularly, as board members, moving forward, housing authorities around the country that we can look to that are doing it really well, that we should really replicate how they do vouchers so that we can, answer the call that the advocates are making, for us to, make the voucher program more robust, but then also, answer the call to the developers that say, oh, the system is too hard, then it make a much more of a plug and play system so that they can't make the argument that the system is too hard.
I'm happy to take it. I think it'll be easier to do this when we're in the midst of the actual analysis, because a lot of folks, I've spoken to several other housing authorities. I know I'm talking to Boston coming up, just checking in, and we talked to some folks in Maryland before. It's a lot of the feedback tends to be are you doing this? Are you doing that within your process? And it's information that I don't have. It's not transparent within the agency, but I do feel like it's exactly the right thought. Right, there are places that we have a pretty low utilization rate. We have some issues to deal with here. There's lots of housing authorities that have better percentages than us, and there's lots to learn from different ones to kind of come up with what is going to work here for our tenants, for our landlords, for our developers, for everybody to be able to work in the system. So I think it's a question as we go through each thing and we identify our problems pretty early on, and I think then is a great time to be able to look at who's doing that right, if it's a technology issue, right, and Mar mentioned that there's some technology things that maybe we can upgrade or improve that would allow us to just be better and faster and quicker, and maybe what it takes is somebody says, here's where we get bottlenecked, and then we go and talk to 5 housing authorities and bring back exactly their process and technology used to remove that bottleneck. We had the same problem 5 years ago, here's how we fixed it, right? I think that communication is going to be very important, figuring out who we've already talked to internally. A lot of this whole conversation, a lot of it's happened before we've had any deep conversations with the staff, and I think it's going to take that time. So I think, yes, lots we can learn from elsewhere, and it's definitely a goal of mine personally, and I'm sure as the group. But I would probably need a little bit more staff time to figure that out.
Charlise, Jala, do you have any?
I do,
thoughts?
but I can't think of the name of the company off the top of my head.
Okay. Thank you, Jala.
I don't have any thoughts on that.
Okay. And I just had a couple of specific questions for each of the proposed appointees. Jala, based on your experience, we've basically been on the board for, I think, almost the exact same amount of time. I think
Maybe
we
a
both,
little over.
Yeah, it's been about a year. So based on the year that you've already, been on the board, and you may have already touched on some of this, but, just based on your year of experience, and obviously your experience as an advocate as well as your experience as a tenant, what do you think, this next version of the board, should be laser focused on, for the remainder of 2025, so to speak, the near term?
So, there's a lot of things we could focus on. I think our main focus we should start off with is our Section 8 program. And there's a lot of discrepancies within our Section 8 voucher program. And folks aren't being held accountable as the way they are pertaining to our families and addressing the issues. Because again, it's a poor lack of communication between the housing authority and the landlords. The landlords are pretty much just getting the payment. They get that payment every first of the month. They don't know what's going on inside of those units. So I think that's something where we should start our first focus is us coming together as a board and implementing a plan where as though our inspectors don't just go in that very first time to inspect the unit to approve the tenant to move in. I think we need to do inspection at least quarterly with our Section 8 programs and housing.
Okay, thank you. And Charlise, based on your extensive, expertise, and obviously we've had numerous conversations about housing. I reach out to you on a regular basis for insight on housing, policy. I think this is a 2-part question. the first part of the question is, how do we need to think about, and this is a seed you kind of planted in my head of thinking about how public housing has changed, over the generations. Because I do think as policymakers and folks in leadership, I tend to kind of still think about public housing, like how public housing was when me and Jala were in high school. I saw your Oliver Bear. I'm not gonna hold that against you. I'm a proud Perry Commodore. But when we were like in the '90s, and you talk about how it's really dramatically changed. First part of the question: can you talk about how public housing, has changed dramatically, over the last generation, and then talk about, what your experience as someone who's been so deeply, involved in housing, particularly working, with the constituency that generally is in that vulnerable place where they need social housing, what that experience brings. So one, how has public housing has changed over the last generation? And then what does your unique experience bring to the table that would be an asset to the board?
Yes. So what I've observed over the years, especially in our senior population, early on in my career, you didn't have to do a background check with the senior population. Well, now you got to do a background check with the senior population because there are a lot of seniors who are have records, who may have drug and alcohol issues, who may be raising their grandchildren. And so the population in our senior buildings have become very vulnerable. And it's scary because you'll see a cluster of seniors between the ages of 62 and 65 who, I'm not far from there, but I'm still 30, for real. But so they move differently. Then you have this cluster of seniors who's 80 and who's just trying to live a decent and peaceful life, right? And so now when we think about our communities, we have to shift our mindset to not think that all the seniors are not some of the seniors are not innocent, right? You have to shift your mindset because if you don't, we're going to continue to have issues when someone call WPXI or call the news and it's just so laser focused on, we're at a senior building. Well, there's some drug infestation in some of the senior buildings. And so those are some of the things that I've seen over the years that has really caused a lot of problems in our public housing and just multifamily period. What was that second question?
Just like your unique experience.
Yes.
What would you bring to the board?
So what I would bring to the board, I would bring, the first thing I would do, I would interview the staff at the Housing Authority. That would be the number one thing I would do because I need to get an understanding, what are you facing? And not to interview them from the perspective of trying to hold them accountable. Let's put all our cards on the table so we can reevaluate what some of the challenges are internally from an operating standpoint. And I would literally use my 25 years of infrastructure when it comes to housing authority policies and procedures and literally revamp some of the structure that is currently residing at the Housing Authority. But one of my greatest desires is to change the current public policies when it comes to housing. Our public policies have been in the same space since conception of affordable housing. And what I am seeing more than anything now is a lot of families need more than just brick and mortar. They need additional resources in order for these families to strive. And I think if we find the right partners and if we really come together and just take a deep dive, and this isn't going to happen overnight, I get it, but I think if we look at it from a broader perspective and inch away at each one of these departments, I think we can have an impact and really have a change in what affordable housing looks like. We don't even, it don't have to necessarily have to say affordable. It could just say housing. Housing one day where everybody is having an equal opportunity to live a peace and safe environment.
I think Charlise and Wasi, you know, and I think you're, you know, really in a much better position to answer this question than maybe a couple years ago, being that, you know, you're you know, halfway through the second term, I believe, you know, in the Congresswoman's office. And I know for the last year, you know, my office and your office have been attached at the hip on the MB affordable stuff. You know, so can you talk about, given your experience now, you know, working in the Congresswoman's office for 3 years, working on a variety of housing issues, but also, and thank you for your work on every Monday afternoon chairing our MB affordable call. You know, what do you really see the value that you can bring now, particularly given not only your position as chief of staff for the Congresswoman, but now with experience of working on a variety of housing issues? And I can only imagine, you know, because I know you have Bondview in your purview as well. Like, you know, it's not just Homewood House and the stuff that I throw on your desk, but you know, you have all the way to Greensburg that you're dealing with. You know, how is that experience, you know, really giving you insight as you think, you know, about, you know, joining the board and what you can bring, not only just from, you know, the position you hold in the office, but also the expertise and experiences that you've gained, you know, in your time in that position?
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilman. I think it's been an honor working in Congresswoman's office as a fierce advocate for affordable housing and housing justice as well. There's been legislation we worked on that we know there's not enough funding for housing. We need some massive spending packages that will really allow us to deal with this national emergency around affordable housing, and not just building new, but also preservation. You know, it's massive, and if we don't have the resources, we're going to lose, you know, thousands of units a year, you know, across, you know, it's just going to become a problem throughout the country. And we realize that. So there's some of those bigger issues. And I think what thing that's really stuck out is that when we had this MB Affordable come, right, a bad actor, private equity type landlord comes in, buys, you know, 1,000 units and 1,500 units in the area, you know, like somebody can come in and do that, be committing fraud, you know, at many different levels across the country. And the painful thing was realizing how limited our tools are to address that, right? So I think that it was a reminder that we need all of us here at this level to be advocates to the federal government around what tools are needed for, you know, like if there's an issue in a building in the South Side and we know for a fact that this person's committing crimes, yet why does somebody have to live, like an elder in our community have to live with a raccoon in their ceiling for X amount of months before anybody does anything or deals with it, right? So it reminds like how limited the HUD inspections are and how important the local work is, local code enforcement, local, you know, HACP in the office and the people there, and how we're everybody's first line of defense and how urgent that is. And you know, local leadership looked for the Congresswoman, you know, did not have to chair a weekly call on this, right? It doesn't have to do with us voting in DC. It's not related to any of our committees. It's just, it's necessary to slowly move these things forward and make sure people are not harmed more, you know, after they're already dealing with living in terrible conditions purely for people who just want to make money, right? They did not have any other motive aside from greed there, and they got caught and they're going to be punished for it. But it's not fair that all the tenants are going to honestly have a worse, you know, experience than they will, and they're the ones who perpetrated this. So it's pretty frustrating, and I think what I've learned is how important it is for us at the local level to all be communicating. You know, this table bringing in people at every level of government, trying to come here and fix this, and we're all on the same page, rowing in the same direction. Like, this is a big, hard problem. You know, it doesn't matter what part of the spectrum you're on in terms of political ideology. It's like, these are issues that our constituents are working on, that are dealing with every single day, and we have to come together and figure it out. And it was hard seeing every single one of us sit at a table, know what we want to do and how we want to help people, and still realize how limited we were. And it was deeply frustrating. And we need to be able to work together to ensure we have the tools in the future to do more faster. So I think that's something that I've learned through the first 3 years here is realizing that frustration and understanding how much we all need each other here to fix this stuff. Yeah.
I just have one final question for Charlise. I did want to just lift up, I think in our most recent conversation, you talked about a partnership that your nonprofit has developed with the county housing, agency. And I'm not trying to make a cheap plug or, sell your program to the housing authority, but I think it is important, just for you to kind of talk about that and to talk about how it may not be waived, but, it maybe it's a similar nonprofit, with the HACP, that could partner. But if you could just talk a little bit about that program and how the housing authority could replicate that kind of partnership, with WAVE or,
Well,
another
don't nobody
similar,
move like WAVE.
or another similar organization. It's not so wavy.
So we provide rental counseling to families. We have a 5-year MOU with Allegheny County Housing Authority. They have some issues that they asked us to step in and resolve when it comes to their delinquent rents. We have an accountability model that holds residents accountable prior to resources being distributed to them. Yeah, I'm not gonna give y'all everything. I'm just real protective over my program. So yeah, so that's what we do, and it's been very successful.
Well, that's all my questions. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve, and thank you for your partnership over the time I've been in office. All three of you, I'm looking forward to working with you, and we have a big job to do. We have a lot of work to do, so all hands on deck, and but thank you so much for coming today. And this is much more like a congressional hearing than our usual interview, so that's kind of fun. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
It's like deja vu, man. Over here.
Councilman Charlin.
Thank you, Council President. I don't know about congressional hearings, but Wazzy, maybe you can let me know. So I appreciate all of you being here today. The work on the Housing Authority that we need to do is some of the most dramatic and some of the most impactful in the city. I get numbers consistently on how many people we're helping in the Housing Authority, between the buildings that we operate and then also, the family communities and the HCV program. I want to start off by asking a question that isn't really, it's not any of your faults, but it's something that concerns, I think, a lot of us, or at least three of us. We don't have regional representation on the Housing Authority anymore. So there are no members on this board that are from our south of the river. I've got 3 large family communities in my district. I have tons of HCV occupants, and there's no representation from anyone from south of the river there. How will you be able to help serve the neighborhoods below the river, and without having representation from there?
I'm happy to start, if that's
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I would be concerned as well if I was in your position and then there's not a representative on the board. And I think that if you have a situation in which we have a big city, there's a lot of neighborhoods, you'll never have enough to represent every section. I do feel like the board needs to be representative and needs to respond to every corner. So I think it's like, let's work together to figure that out. Any area that's not represented by somebody where they physically live on the board, I think it's important for us to have a structure in place as a board to be like, how are we meeting with and working with communities there? And I think it's fair to say that, just because if we don't actually have that representative, maybe do, treat that we have to have even more engagement, right, with folks. You guys know your districts very well. There's other electeds that represent your areas. There's other organizations that are well known there that might work with the exact tenants that you're talking about that are in your districts pretty regularly and have a really good idea of what's happening. They say, that's what's going on, right? So I think it's important for us to figure that out. I know, from my experience, I think representing 750,000 folks in our district, it's particularly tough, right? When that's how big it is and how hard it is to go from place to place. And I think what we've found is relying on our local folks and ensuring that, we can kind of work with you guys to understand who we think needs to be represented. I also have had lots of experience where just because somebody lives in the neighborhood does not mean that they're very connected there,
Sure.
So I think it's like, maybe this will be healthy for the board to really reflect, are we actually serving these communities and not just dismissing, oh, we have somebody from East Liberty, so they're represented, right? Even though if they have no deep connections, they recently moved there or whatever. But there's got to be a better way for us to be able to figure that out. And I think making sure that we have open dialogue the whole time to see if you guys feel like your constituents are being represented, and ensuring that your voices are at the table and the folks' voice at the table. But very much take the point seriously, and I think we can take that into our very first meeting to be like, how are we going to figure this out? Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go out on a limb. I think the new appointed board members or the new board committee, one of the strategies could be each board member is assigned a region, and we build subcommittees so that some volunteers can help do some outreach work in these communities that are underserved. That could be a strategy, and at least you have a point of contact to know, if you're not getting any representation, there's a face with a name that you can literally contact so that we can try to address some of the issues in the community. But I think community outreach is going to be very important, whether it is not, we have to have subcommittees. Boards have to have subcommittees in order for them to be impactful. You can't do all of this work on your own. There's just too many people, too many communities. But if we try to build subcommittees, I think that could have an impact and could help resolve some of the lack of representation in your district.
So what I'll say is this: I wear many different hats. I'm just not a board member. I'm boots on the ground, and I'm in every community throughout the city and Allegheny County. I do a lot of eviction prevention. So I am aware of a lot of the things that's going on in these other communities where you think there may not be no representation, but word of mouth is very powerful. And my name and my phone number, I don't know if it's on a billboard somewhere throughout this city or this county, but families call me all the time. Our magisterial districts, actually, they reach out to me directly and they send a lot of referrals to me. Smith, your district is actually one of the districts who has a very high eviction rate, and I get a lot of referrals from your magistrate Martini, and I do appeals assistance. So I'm one of the only Black women in Allegheny County that does hands-on evictions appeal assistance. So I work directly with the Court of Common Pleas at the DCR. I think I may have mentioned this before. I'm not know if you're familiar with any work that I do outside of sitting on the board of the Housing Authority, but I'm very familiar of the issues that's going on in our surrounding communities. And I work with families hand in hand to make sure that I help them stabilize their housing and provide them with any other resources that's needed that'll benefit them and their dependents in their household.
I appreciate that. It is something that I'm worried about. Again, there's a common feeling that neighborhoods from the South are forgotten. This is another example of this, and I need help at Calgary High Rise. I need help at Arlington Heights. I need help at Morris Gardens, and it would be beneficial to have somebody from the area that knows these buildings. Arlington Heights is always a very challenging building for me because it's somewhat transient. It's really hard to build a strong tenants council there or anything like that. It's something that we've been working on really hard from our office to try to figure out how to build tenants councils. You might be familiar that building a tenants council is not just like building a tenants council at a HUD property is not the same at building a tenants council for an RCO or any other apartment building. You have to essentially elect a board of supervisors that cannot be the people that are elected on the board. The people that want to be on the board don't want to be supervisors because they want to run for the board, which creates a hurdle there. and it's nothing that you can do about it. There's no way that you can make that a more efficient process because it's a HUD regulation. Which leads me to the other question that I wanted to ask you about. I heard a lot of like really good ideas here, but one of the things that concerns me when we talk about the housing authority is you can't do anything you want. You've got a move to work designation, you've got all kinds of HUD regulations. So when you're talking about the things that you'd like to do, what process are you using to check, is this something we actually can do? HUD is going to be way more regulatory than anything this body will do for you. What mechanisms are you using to make sure that what you want to do is something that you actually can do?
Sure, happy to. Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to go?
I think
No.
you want me to jump
I
in.
can go after you.
No. Just go ahead.
So I'm experienced with the HUD regulations. So I'm very experienced with the policies. So because I'm so experienced in the policies, I know what you can do. I'm aware of the tenant selection plans. I'm aware of how rents are supposed to be collected. I'm aware of how the wait list is supposed to operate. So I understand these policies like the back of my hand because I've been in the industry for so long. So when we look to revamp the infrastructure of the operations, we have to stay in order with the policies and procedures of the handbooks.
No, thank you. I think it's a good question. I think if I were to categorize like a large majority of the things that I think folks were advocating for, I think a lot of it has to do with like current things that we absolutely know how to HACP is supposed to be doing, and that we just want it to be done better. And I think that's safe in that space because it's not anything fancy. It's just like kind of like bread and butter. Here's the basics, right? Are we doing the basics to the highest possible level? If not, how do we get there? I think anything else, I think there's like, they have access to counsel with HACP, and you also have access to HUD representatives that you can talk to be like, well, we want to come up with creative ways to hit our fair cloth limit. We're not there yet. We desperately need affordable housing in the city and all across, how are the different ways that people have legally been able to do that with the move to work designation? There's people within HUD that can actually answer those questions. You do have to pose the right question. They'll never produce the plan for you, right? Like, here's how Pittsburgh can get to the fair cloth. I'm glad you asked that question. Let me write this whole plan for you. But if you ask them all these questions, it'd be like, hey, here's this thing that we saw in another city use that utilized this fund. It's like, actually, you're not allowed to do that because you're moved to work, right? Or a move to work designation that we're actually tracking because we know which ones there are, and we go to those places and check those housing authorities. We try to see which ones, what they're doing that we can replicate and learn from, right? And HUD can tell us, like, oh, well, yeah, that's totally possible, but they had a giant amount of money given to them by the city or some entity, or the state. And that's how it happened, right? So it's for us to kind of dig in and figure out. But I do feel like, because a large percentage of what we're talking about is really just the bread and butter stuff, I do think we also will have the flexibility to work with that. I think we'll have partners to be able to do that. I think I found it really easy when I've been trying to engage with other folks around the country so far. And I think we can be creative, like together. I think it's like a process that we're all going to go through to be like, we all want more units. I think everybody agrees, like how to get there is going to be an interesting conversation. And then we'll see what can we achieve with the resources we have, and what do we have the will to do together. And I think that's going to be a cool process to go through together. And but I think that percentage that we're going to have to get creative, fortunately, I think is a smaller percentage of the total work that needs to happen.
Both of this lady and gentleman was spot on. But Bob, what I do want to say to you is I would greatly appreciate if you would reach out to me directly. I can help you with all of your families over on the South to build their tenant councils. That's something I've been working directly with Barb Warwick's office with, and helping Glen Hazel build their tenant council. Two other ladies, or was it three other ladies? I think there might have been three other ladies with me, but we built and did our own tenant council just by reading 96.3 rules and regs. We didn't have an idea of anything, how to do things. We were private at that time. We wasn't a public entity under housing authority at that time. We were private, and we put together our tenant council, And we did a very good job at being successful with that tenant council. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I was one of those tenants who was suffering and living in deplorable conditions in Manchester. We just did a walk and talk in Manchester on Friday. I don't know if you read the article, but that was like one of the first three sentences in that article is how me and 2 other residents in Manchester, we did build a tenant council with the help of our constituents, and Daniel Lavelle and Jake Wheatley also stepping up to recognize us as a standing committee. But I would be more than glad to help you with those residents to get them a tenant council formed.
Yeah, as you know, there's a big difference between a private tenant council and a HUD tenant council, and we have had the trouble for us has been the gap in between. People want to be on the tenant council, but you have to elect a board an elections board essentially before you can actually have the council. No one wants to be on the elections board because they want to be on the tenant council. You can't be both. And that has been our challenge here. Actually, tomorrow we're having a pizza party at Caligari to try to bring people out and get people excited about running for the tenants council in Caligari, because as I knew from being a staffer, we had strong tenant councils in all of our buildings, and then the pandemic happened and people moved on, and we've lost all of them. We're part of the way there. We had elections on Friday in Morris Gardens, but we need a lot of work, and that really helps us do our job when we've got an effective tenants council. Those buildings that have those are so much easier to work in than buildings that don't have them.
But those are public buildings.
Those are, and they
And
all have
housing authority is required to appoint somebody to those buildings to help them build a steering committee and then also do the election process.
right, and they have been. They just can't find bodies. That's the problem. So that's why we're doing the pizza party.
Okay.
So, other members have brought this up as well, but this is a concept that I'm obsessed with, is the idea that Pittsburgh's not a special snowflake. We like to say Pittsburgh's so unique, but it's not. We can learn from other cities all the time. And you've kind of all touched on this in other ways. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think outreach is going to look like to learn from other housing authorities?
Yeah. I'll try something. Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I think the best outreach talking to them, because I think we have such great general conversations when we're generally talking about housing authority policy. The thing I think we really need is just like these super specific conversations, on process. And I think that's it. I think it's like, ensuring that, how do we do that in a way that the staff is core to this, right? It can't just be the board members going and talking to people around the country, and then we're not the ones doing the job every day, right? Like the housing authority staff themselves in each individual department, if they're looking, and I'm sure a lot of them are looking for this, right? We can help to be liaisons to ensure that this gets set up, but I'm sure a lot of them would love to learn from their colleagues, get to know their colleagues in other places, and find ways to, and share stuff that they do well, and bring things, to here that we can do well. And I think the facilitation of that, right, and just understanding to what level is that happening right now. And I think, generally what we've heard is that there could be a lot more of it, and then just making sure that we make the opportunities happen and ensure that they are, right? I don't know if it's been part of the board's past to be like, are we actually doing that? Are we holding the institution accountable to ensure that we're finding the best practices around the country? And is that one of the things that we were required to be reported to us, right? Like what information are we consuming to ensure that this entire entity is moving in the direction we all know it needs to be moving? And then if we're not even asking about that, we have to start. Once we find out, then I think, if it's kind of like there's needs to be support, I think it's very much something that we can do and add to our plate. It's like, we need help, reaching out to these cities, reaching out to these places, finding contacts. I think it's definitely something that, if that's not possible within the staff currently, but I do think there needs to be something that sets an expectation. You're right, not a special snowflake here. There's lots we can learn, and if we need to make sure that it's not optional that we're doing this learning, and if it has been, it needs to be something that we ensure that we fully understand. If we're doing everything perfectly. That's not where we're at, and I think we all agree. So then we need to kind of ensure that that's happening in with some urgency, and I think that's an early conversation. But yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I agree with what he said.
I can say that, like, you know, I've worked really hard on zoning reform and calling through other cities and learning about what that process looked like, what their activists look like, what works, what doesn't work, is invaluable for me. And you know, that should be the way that we don't need to invent anything here in Pittsburgh. We can steal everything from other cities, and I cannot stress that enough to everyone we talk to. That is what we should be doing. We should be stealing their ideas, what works, and also learn from what doesn't work. Did someone try something and it failed miserably? Well, let's not do that here. So, like, I you're not going to read about that in City Lab or in governing, but those are the things that are most valuable for us. The failed ideas from other cities. Make sure we don't do that here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about straight up the Trump administration. Every day, guidelines are changing so dramatically. We hear this from all of our institutional partners. Like, it seems like everyone's got, you know, kind of like deer in the headlights, kind of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what this week's going to look like.
Oh, thank you so much.
No,
No, that's for you, Ramadan, you know, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
I'm going to take the chance to say thank you, and I've learned and taken a lot of notes, but I also have to leave. I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah,
So,
good to see you.
what are you worried about with the Trump? What are your fears of what's happening, and how do you plan on navigating that? I think it's a lot of the unknown right now. I think we're all in that situation where, you know, talk to the universities. They certainly don't know what next week's going to look like. But how do you plan on navigating that? We can't have a plan for what waves we're going to hit, but we do have to have a plan for how we're going to drive the boat, kind of deal.
Yeah, 100%. I'm happy to start. Yeah, I think it's a great point, right? It's been a mess trying to figure out all the different ways the Trump administration is destroying our federal government, and I think one thing that we can do, and we have to do like pretty urgently, is that some of this is telegraphed, like Project 2025 type stuff, leaks. You know, we need to go find those whistleblowers that are hearing information before we have it, and be prepared before something negative happens. Like, we should absolutely be ready for an office closure here. You know, we should absolutely be ready for losing representatives in certain offices. We should absolutely be ready for certain, you know, like, I think when we talk about how do you understand which departments, like they already, somebody released a list of all the different places that are going to be gutted, like FHIP or whatever, all of those places, right? And then as soon as that exists, as soon as we're able to get that information from somebody willing to leak it, and now it's public and we have it, what is the plan? You know, what are we going to do if suddenly this department's gone, right? Or this department's like half its staff, right? Like, how do we limit our need and reliance on those individuals? Because it's unfortunately going to be extremely stressed out remaining individuals who don't know what to do when their caseload quadruples overnight. And it's just like, we have to be able to minimize how much we are going to be dependent upon them. Sometimes you can't, right? I mean, it's on purpose. The Trump administration is trying to make sure that our constituents will not have housing because they cannot access these services, and that's what they're doing. But on our end, you know, it's a time where, like, when the resources are more limited, how do we become as efficient as possible? And also, at the end of the day, one thing I'll always remember is how many people got fired and they tried to rehire them. Like, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're hurting or what they're harming. We have to be loud early on and then lift up and say how any of these cuts are going to harm our residents. Why you doing this is just helping, you know, like bad actor landlords get away with whatever they're doing, no matter how terribly they're harming the people in our districts. And that needs to be lifted up, not just for the administration to understand it before they do it, hopefully preventing them from making mistakes like they've already made. Some of them they have undone and rehired people that they fired because they didn't realize how much harm it caused. So that means it's always important to raise our voices, but also because everybody in our region needs to hear it. Everybody in the country needs to hear it. They need to understand what the harm is happening, and maybe in the future it'll be, you know, we can get these programs back, we can get these resources back. But if in the chaos of a rebuild, even if we get the, you know, presidency back and we're trying to put this, we need to ensure that we're very clear on what is our top ask. Like, what was taken away from us that had the most negative consequence to our tenants, and we have to fight to make sure it doesn't get taken away. But if it does, and unfortunately it's likely a lot of agencies are seeing this, how are we advocating to restore it? And what exactly does it need to look like? And how can it be better than last time, right? I think it's kind of like making sure we're prepared for that. As hard as we're dealing with the consequences of everything happening, it's easy to forget to be prepared. But I do think we have to ensure that we're planning for what's going to be happening and also looking to the future to be like, how do we rebuild? But it's a tough time. I mean, as our federal office, we're going to be there trying to understand the cuts as they come in and really understand what that'll mean for our folks here and engage with the folks left at Housing Authority, at HUD, that are good folks, because there are people still in the administration that are just, there's career folks that are trying to do right by everybody, that are terrified about what's happening, but they're still there, and we can still work with some of them and help to work. So I think we have to directly engage with those people that are willing to talk to us. The political appointees at the top, it's not them. It was great working with Secretary Fudge to bring $50 million to the Hill and try to get more money for federal dollars here. It's a different world now, right? But there's still other people lower than that are career folks that we can work with, and we'll continue to find those relationships. And HACP needs to have those personal relationships with those individuals, because the senior ones are not going to help us. So
I'm going to put a little spin on what he said, because he covered that very well. I think it's very important that we educate our families exactly what is going on in the administration. There has been rumors that some families may only have a couple years to participate in subsidized housing. We know something's going to come, but we don't know what that something is. And so we have been really intentional on just communicating as much information as we can to the families so that they really understand what impact that this can have on them individually. Because a lot of our families living in public housing, they don't care about CNN. That's not their forefront. And so it's important for us to let them know and keep them aware and try to empower them as much as we can so that they can be prepared for the shift.
What does that look like?
So we have had some workshops in reference to letting them know. I'm always in the community advocating, having conversations. When we participate in our rental counseling classes, we literally talk to them. Our counselors are trained to let them know, hey, you're delinquent right now in your rent, but let me tell you what's about to come down the pipe on their one-on-one sessions. So, we're not doing it by the masses, but we are making sure we educate any consumers that come into our organization. But that can be something that the Housing Authority can pick up when they change their infrastructure.
So, as we know, I don't know if you guys know, but as I know, the Allegheny County Housing Authority is already doing so. They are putting caps and limits on how much a landlord can raise a tenant's rent. They capped it at $50. That's just a cap, and I think that's what we need to do here at the city as well. Put a cap on rents, allow landlords to know that you can't go above a $50 limit every so couple months, and if you do, you need to put that in writing in 120 days ahead of time so we can make sure that we have these resources to the side and we can cover these. They're also doing something else I've heard of. It's called 2 heartbeats in one room. They're downsizing people's vouchers to 3-bedroom instead of giving them a 4, and that's their way of being able to save money, save fundings and resources. And I think that'll work, especially we don't know, like Wasi said, what's going to happen in the days to come, and I just think we need to get ahead of it and prepare now.
I think my biggest thing here is that we don't, you're right, we don't know what's going to happen. And you need you need to make sure that you have the plan in place for whatever it might be. I think that's going to be true for all of our organizations here. I want to well, I'll come back to that in a second here. Speaking of the HCV, which I've got as many residents as I've got in in the family communities, I also have way more in HCV in my district. I have an example, and I don't mind this guy knowing how much I don't like him. There's a gentleman who owns a property in Knoxville, kind of the gateway of Knoxville, and it's 40 some units in there, 100% HCV in the building. This guy, the building is in deplorable condition. One of the tenants let me in. There's broken glass all throughout it. Babies playing on broken glass. It's a fire hazard. The fire alarms are going off everywhere. It is truly a disaster. We are in court, as often as we can get him in court, telling him he has got to do something with this building, but he's not going to, because he'll get fined and he'll just move on. That's the cost of doing business. And we were at a point where he was so far behind on his water bill, we're like, why don't we condemn the building? Why don't we do that? We run into a situation here where if we condemn Mark's building, then
Displaced families.
all the families that live there, that's who I'm talking about, yeah. All the families are there. What are we going to do with them? So is it better to have these babies playing on broken glass or be displaced?
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I have, and I want to know, what can we do to solve this?
So recently, me and this beautiful lady here, we have been appointed to a housing advisory committee with the county health department. And this is something I spoke about at our last meeting and how we held the slumlords accountable. And what I said was, I feel like those rents that the families are paying directly to these landlords, I feel like those rents need to go into an escrow account at the county health department, and the county health department send in inspectors to make those repairs, and they hold that money, and they can use that money to make those repairs. Or if the landlord finally pays off his fines and decides that he's going to hire inspectors to make those repairs, once those repairs are completed, and we send someone out to reassure that those things have been fixed, then we can release those funds to him out of escrow. I think that's the only way that we could get some of these slumlords' attentions, or we just ban them from the Section 8 program as a whole, and we hold a housing authority accountable because they tore down how many of your units in St. Clair Village? Over 1,000?
Yeah.
Didn't replace them? Yeah. So those 1,000 families are just surfacing around in the county with vouchers, right? The majority of them probably stayed on the south side with those vouchers.
Yeah.
That's
a lot of them
big,
moved to Knoxville, yeah.
right. That's a big issue with the housing authority and them getting out of being the landlords. They're demolishing units and they're not putting back a 1-for-1, which is the what? The fair cloth to rag.
So, but is that something we're allowed to do? Or would HUD allow us to put that rent in an escrow? Or is that something?
So that'd be the tenant's portion doesn't come from
right.
HUD. It comes directly out of the tenant's pocket. Now the HAT payments would just be put on hold until those units come into compliance. And then once those units are into compliance, and then we could release that HAT payment, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of payments, then we could release those payments to the landlord once he comes back into compliance. Because not only do tenants need to be in compliance, landlords need to be in compliance as well. And again, like I said previously, I think it was a question that Kahori asked me, we need to have inspectors go out, not just the very first time when families move in these units. We need to do quarterly inspections and have our housing inspectors go in and inspect these units because they're the ones that's making these HAT payments. Every first of the month, it's like clockwork. They don't miss. They hit these accounts every single first of the month. And I just think that we need to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
You can never give me a voucher, Bob. I would never take one.
Yeah.
I think I've said that here before. I would never take a Section 8 voucher. There's no benefit to it. I mean, you can move out of town with it, a year later, or you convert it from city to the county or from the county back over to the city. But then again, as we know, paperwork gets lost. These housing specialists aren't being able to be reached. There's no one in these offices. There's folks working from home, working out the bed, however that may work. But I mean, it's just the truth. And I just feel as though that we need to keep all our housing as a public stock and not making them private.
We sit on the same committee, so I agree.
Really do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're stuck in the situation here where we're picking like the least bad option, you know.
Yeah.
And, Properties 107 Knox, go check it out. It's
Yeah.
deplorable.
Yeah, I do feel like it's another partnership conversation we talked about earlier. Like, yeah, we have a friend in the county who's willing to. We had these issues with the privately owned, project-based, privately financed properties in the MB of and other private owners, and we have like tried to do this like clean and lean strategy, right? Like we're just gonna go and do it if somebody comes and submits to the complaint. We just went to the tenants, said, here's the health department thing, here's how you file. We had somebody help them with that. It goes to the health department. We immediately start a clock, then we do it, and just like, all right, we're doing this and billing you, and we're just going to keep doing that, and they're going to have to pay, or else there's going to be an issue. But at least the tenant is going to be, the issue is going to be resolved immediately, right? No matter what, that is at least good. You have to figure that out, because like they have the power to do that, but where are the funds to do that at scale, right? So we just have to think through it. But at least the authority exists with local code enforcement to demand that. That happened when folks were going to like freeze, when the temperatures dropped to those really scary temperatures, and we go in, same situation. You talk to tenants, you're like, you don't have heat, go door to door, knock on every single door, make sure people understand that if that's the case, we're going to get the health department here, we're going to get city code enforcement, deem the thing unlivable because of cold, force them to do it, have they foot the bill, like the health department can foot the bill for the hotels in the meantime, but everything is owed. That's a lien. Like the landlord has to pay. That's their responsibility to do that. And we inform HUD. We bring HUD into it to be like, well, you're not getting payments for these because you're not serving these clients, and you're in violation of your contract with us. And then they do it. In those cases, it was enough pressure to make the landlord suddenly appear. The property managers were there. They start to do it. They paid back all the money, and that was owed for the hotels, and everything was fine. They had the resources the whole time. They just did not do a well enough job of working with tenants or care enough to do it, right? But suddenly when all these parties came together, they showed up and like, okay, fine, we'll do it. We're always going to do it. And I'm like you said, I've already been in this unit. I'm walking on the glass too. I see it. You didn't fix it. But, whenever this pressure is added. So these kinds of tools, we have to look more into them, and how do we use them more? Because there's too many of these folks that have realized they can get away with whatever, and know nothing's going to happen to them, because if we push it, everybody's going to get displaced, and they know we won't push it. And we had the same issue there with the project base. If HUD pulls the HAP contract, which HUD has ability to do, then that person is punished. They lost a massive asset. They're going to get foreclosed on by the bank. Yeah, that sucks. But what about these 300 tenants, right? So then we're on a tough spot, And eventually in these units, particularly for NB, these landlords that are really terrible, that are eventually just going to be forced to lose these properties, go into this process of receivership. Can our housing authorities in the future serve as a receiver, or can we be a long-term buyer? Can we actually take these units that unfortunately have really taken a lot of hits, but post-receivership, financing has been put in there to get them stable. Can we put those and make them as part of public housing stock? I think that's a really important thing for us to look at. Unfortunately, these really bad landlords ending in receivership is not uncommon. It can happen. And when that happens, though, we are not currently ready to buy them, right? Like, we have to figure that out. Say this person ends up in receivership because of all these issues and is forced into that situation, but can we do it, or will the take two of the same person come in and buy the building and do the same thing again, right? And we right now are in a situation where somebody's just going to buy and do the same thing again. But if we're an option, maybe we can figure that out. And it's working with lenders, it's working with HUD to get approval. It's a process, but we're all willing to figure it out. Like, if we just we realize there's too many bad actors in this space, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right, and the last question I have for you, you've all kind of mentioned change in leadership. That's a theme that I've kind of heard from everyone here. So it's no secret the executive director's contract is up fairly shortly here. He does have in the contract a 90-day notice. Have you figured out what your plan is to do with a new executive director, or do you plan on buying him out of that 90-day notice? What is your intention as the board? Have you made a decision?
What I want to say, and this was a conversation I was going to have with you anyway, and since Bob brought it up, let's talk about it now. Let the public hear it too. We have not seen that contract, and I'm going to say because I'm already a board member.
Right.
I have not seen that contract. I've been on the board for a little over a year now. I have not seen that contract. I do know back in late September, maybe early October, there was a RFP for an executive search. I had to actually Google up the company that the Housing Authority hired because that information was never provided to the board. Gaines and Gaines was the company that they hired, the consultant company to do the executive search. I wouldn't say I would say that we would buy out the contract. What I would say is that we asked to see that contract and put some strategies together over those course of 90 days to see what it is that we could do as the board to figure out, do we want to honor that 90 days or what's coming along with the executive search. And as of right now, we don't have that information available.
All right. That's all for me. Thank you all for being here and for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Councilwoman Smith.
The moment you've all been waiting for. Just kidding. First, I want to start this off by saying I appreciate anyone who serves on a board of authority in the city of Pittsburgh. It is not easy. I've taken my name off one before. I'm back on, and I'm ready to take my name off again. So I understand. It's frustrating. It really is. But it's also so important. And there's a lot going on. I actually think we need to review all the boards and authorities and what's happening in some of them. So I think maybe with the next mayor's race, with the mayor's race coming up, and who knows what will happen, maybe that's a good time to take a review. I won't be here, so they can have at it. So I'm
still bother
retiring.
you.
I'm retiring. No, I'm excited. And I told her to be. I'm changing my number. But anyway, but I do want to thank you all. And my concerns have nothing to do with you personally, so I want to make sure that's very clear, that my concerns have something to do with, well, first of all, let me start by saying my experience with Housing Authority when I first got on council in 2009 was, my very first interaction was with the former housing director who was getting ready to sell a pool in Ferrywood to a developer who just put in a lot of people in apartments over there. And they did away with the subsidized housing there, and they tore down, Broadhead Manor. Mm-hmm. And so when they did that, they built, they said it was flooded, and there was, only one section they could build housing. And so this happened to be where this developer developed. And he was going to purchase the pool there, but he wasn't going to allow the Ferrywood residents to swim there. And the director at the time was okay with that. I stopped it because I thought, you better get out of here. No way are you going to let people that lived here forever watch your people come in here and swim. And it was just, the whole thing was just horrible. So that was my first experience. So, and we did stop that, and that was at the time, I think it was Mayor Ravenstall who actually, he and Ron Zober actually worked with me to put a halt to that. That pool still sits there. But empty. But since then they want to do something more with it. So now we're working on a plan for it. But then my second interaction was in a Sheridan Community Council meeting where I found out that Housing Authority back in the day had, first of all they purchased. There was some kind of purchase. Something happened with a council member who was then the council president, and something with Housing Authority properties in Sheridan, and that person went to jail.
Council member, council president, Tom Murphy.
No, the council person went to jail. The council president went to jail for what they did in Sheridan. So Sheridan was jaded. And then along comes all the people that when Broadhead was flooded, they had scattered site housing. They sued, and they sued the city, I think, and HUD, I can't remember. But they won, and they got scattered sites. And what they did was they never did like a way for people to work together, to like any kind of integrations, anything where people were learning like what it's like to own your own home now, what it's like to take care of a property. I tell people all the time, when I moved to my side of town, I grew up on Fifth Avenue. When I moved over to the west side, my neighbor bought me down a lawnmower. I didn't know my lawn bothered her property, or bothered her. So, but somebody took the time to teach me that. I was young, and so I had somebody help me through that. They never had that in Sheridan. And what happened was over time, property values started decreasing, crime started increasing, tensions started rising, and there's just been a lot of stuff where it could have been avoided had people just sat people down together from the beginning and had some kind of meeting, some kind of mediation, some kind of work, and I can't remember what I called it, but anyway, but that never happened. So that was with previous directors. Then came Castor Binion, and I want to tell you, to me, he has been a gazillion times better. Because one, he's not gone to jail.
That's better.
Two, yeah, a lot better. Two, he's heard the community. He sends people out to the meetings. They go and they talk to people. They get the concerns. And when you're saying that you help people in my district, and I appreciate that, but I want you to know that a lot of times the reason they're there in court is because the other residents all around them are also complaining about them, and they may also be poor, they just don't have a voucher. That doesn't mean that they don't want to live in peace. That means that they tried everything they can until they finally get so frustrated, they either call us, 311, or Housing Authority themselves, and they get people into housing court. And so it takes a long time and a lot of frustration before they get to that point. I wish what we would do is when people get to that point, we'd come up with some mediation and people would learn to work together in the community to improve the communities. But my concern today is that there is an election pending, and I think that we should have waited to put in a new board. I don't disagree that I feel like Mayor Gainey has been with a board that maybe he wasn't his choosing for years, and one of those people did live in my district. And so it is very upsetting to me that, I mean, it's great that you work in my district, you don't live in my district. It's great that you think you know my community leaders, you don't know my community leaders. You know, a lot of people identify our areas and people that they think are leaders, and that from the East End or from other places, they don't live there. You know what I mean? If you don't live there, you don't really know what's going on every day. It's hard for people who do live there sometimes to know. But for me, this guy that they took off is Alex. And I don't know if you know Alex, but Alex he's gay, he's an immigrant, a Filipino immigrant, served in the military. My area has a growing gay population, huge growing gay population. We have a growing immigrant population, and we have the largest veteran population. So to me, he represents that area and what, you know, should happen and could happen. And I feel like taking his voice off is taking a big chunk of District 2 off, because he not only does he do stuff, they actually ran a community group in our neighborhoods, one of our neighborhoods. They volunteer now with our Greater West End Alliance, doing housing work, and so so he's very in tune with what's happening in our district, and he feels. I mean, I feel like I know that he would have served more and felt like, you know, he wanted to serve more. He also asked for evening meetings. That might be something that's one of the reasons people weren't crazy about him being there. But I think he served, you know, he wanted evening meetings so the public could be more engaged. And so to me, that's not a bad thing. It's like, okay, he's saying what he thinks is right. So I have an issue with that. And so if I vote no, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons. The other reasons are I'm going to look into the Ethics Commission, because it's my understanding that you cannot, do any of you receive public grants or contracts with the city in any fashion to do the work that you're doing? Where do you get your funding? Can you want to start? How's you funded from an organization?
I'm an employer of Rent Help PGH.
Okay.
PHFA, Pennsylvania Housing
Okay.
Financial Agency, Hillman Founder.
So
I have no
that's part of the
contract
city.
with the city.
Well,
No,
PHF
Pennsylvania
Oh,
Housing.
Pennsylvania, not Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Okay.
Pennsylvania, and
And
HUD. I don't have
Wasiullah.
any.
Yeah,
So that's my only thing, is I would want to make sure that there's
Oh,
no
yeah.
ethics violation. So I'm definitely going to ask for a legal opinion to make sure that we're following that, or some kind of opinion. But I think that one of the things I had an issue with, honestly, with the Housing Opportunity Fund was everybody on there. You all sound so informative, and so that's the same with Housing Opportunity Fund. They're so knowledgeable about the areas they're in, but they do get, you know, a lot of them do get grants and contracts from the city, and so I think that's one of the reasons we have to look into that. It was something I complained about under Bill Peduto's term. That's one of the reasons I took myself off of that board too. So I'm good at taking myself off, huh, Daniel? Council President Lavelle. But for me, I'm going to look into the any kind of contracts, any kind of conflicts of interest, any kind of ethics thing. But for me, it's mostly the time that we're, Mayor Gainey didn't appreciate, I'm sure, having to work with a board that he didn't choose. for so many years. And I know he didn't appreciate it with PWC because he issued an executive order. But I know you've all been on the campaign trail out there, being promoted as the best thing for this board. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know that you're not, because you sound so knowledgeable and so good with the information you have. And so when you talk about advisory committees, that's part of my problem with this current administration. Is I feel like they're so they're not in tune with Southwest Pittsburgh at all. And so when they talk about things in our district, it's not really reflective of what our district says or does or wants or anything. I don't know how anybody's going to be able to assure Sheridan that when they're doing something in that community, that they have their best interests, because they don't trust government at all. I mean, and they rightfully so, because we've done a lot to them. Not me, but prior years. And so there's going to be a lot of tension and concern. And I would want the board, any new board, I would want you to come to one of my meetings to talk to people, so they have some comfort level in what's happening. Because I don't care what I feel. I worry about what they think and what they feel and how they have to live every single day. And they're living in Sheridan with some of the worst mistakes that we have made as government with housing. And a lot of it could have been avoided one could have been avoided with conversation, one could have been avoided by following the law. So for me, tell me how you would really be able to represent Southwest Pittsburgh. I mean, truly, other than, what you know of it from the outside looking in. I mean, is there something, I know, can I say Summer has been to Crafton Heights twice, okay? So I'm going to say that. And to the, Elliot, to the, I think she went to the Education Partnership.
Yeah.
Which is a major, And you're located where I used to work. Are you located on North Island?
Not anymore, but I was there. I just moved.
Oh, where'd you move to?
Lincoln, Leamington.
Okay. So I used to work on North Island for a long time. And so, I'm sorry, did you?
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. I think your point's very well taken. And I think, aside from, my day job where I'll have the, blessing to interact with you all a good bit and hopefully more, I think that's a great suggestion, to be able to come out and go to the meetings that you suggest and meet the people that you need to, suggest. Because, I think you're right that I don't live in the community personally, but I would do anything I could to get to know the community a little bit better, so we take those suggestions really seriously and be able to try to figure out, and as we're thinking through the vision and the direction and, what's going to be really, really important is input, from people and hearing what folks think are the top issues. We've gotten a lot of input to get to this point because we all work in and around the space. We all work with a lot of folks in the region that are have a lot to say about HACP and housing in general here. But specifically, let's make sure that all the folks that you're talking about get a direct say to us. And it's like, name the time and place. I'm always happy to come, as much as possible. So I appreciate the invitation.
You hung out at my mother's funeral for 2 hours, so I know you're willing to go anywhere.
I'm always ready. Thank you so much for having me there. I appreciate it.
No, please. Thank you. Thank you for being there.
I agree 110% with what you're saying. I used to manage Justin in Mount Washington, the property where they were infested with bed bugs.
It was horrible, right?
And there was a lot of families with mental health issues. Yeah. And I also used to manage another building where I got stabbed 5 times on the job from a resident.
In my district?
No, in a different district. But I was responsible for these 2 buildings, right? So 50% of my time was up in Justin. Another 50% of my time was at the same building, but they all had mental health issues, right? So I'm sharing that with you to say I'm boots on the ground, right? I didn't have to come back into this industry, but I believe in our people. And I'm not saying that I'm familiar with Mount Washington the way that I used to, because again, my career shifted. But that's not to say that I'm not willing to come back to a place where I'm very familiar with some of the issues sitting up there in Mount Washington and in Belsuver and that side of the city. I used
now have part of Arlington, right?
Yeah, I live.
He has to remind me all the time.
Yeah, so I'm very, very, very familiar with that side of the town. Okay. Even when I worked for the Housing Authority back in 2002, early in my career, I managed Arlington Heights. I remember doing inspections in one of those units, and I walked in a unit, and a young lady was sitting there, and her boyfriend was sitting on the couch, and he had a rifle like hanging underneath the couch to let me know, you just better come in and inspect and leave, right? So I've been in your community.
So that brings me to another question, though. But I do want to talk a little bit more about my community first. But because for me, it's so important. I feel like the URA has absolutely no representation in Southwest Pittsburgh, and there's been plenty of opportunity to put somebody on there. There's just never has been. This has nobody. The only one we have now is Alex, and you're going to take him off. And there's just a lot of boards and authorities that don't have representation from Southwest Pittsburgh, and yet you see the East End is so heavily involved in some of this. And I mean, it's like you're making decisions for our areas that we don't agree with always. And so we're not the East End. You know, we're not loaded with universities. We're not loaded with hospitals. You know, over there, it's living. That's what we do, you know. And a lot of Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh employees live in our side of town. And they're getting quite disgusted, to be honest with you, with everything that's happening in the city of Pittsburgh. And it's been going on for some time, but especially, you know, policing and some of the things that they're saying. And a lot of it's around housing and just seeing the services not, you know, delivered as much as they used to be. And so they're seeing a lot of that, and their frustrations are growing over there. So when I say to them, you know, we're going to lose Alex on the board, they're upset. You know, because they know that he's somebody who's been an advocate for them, and that Castor Binion has been a voice that we could work with and of reason a lot of times, where he understood. He didn't always agree with what they were saying, but he understood how they got to where they were. So I don't want to. When you're talking about replacing him, I would love for you to get to know him and to know what his agenda is, and not just come in because it's somebody's agenda to get rid of him, or to any employee. One of the things I hate about watching this whole thing with elections is I hate seeing employees worrying about their jobs. I think it's disgusting. I think that we should make them all civil services, you know, employees or something, some way that people don't have to worry every 4 years about where they're going to work and what's happening, because you know these people are out there doing their jobs every single day, and they work hard. A lot of them work very hard, and the ones that come into our community have been extremely helpful to us. So I just want to make sure I say that, and I know some of them do live in our side of town too. So for me, that's going to be a concern, and it's going to be something I'm just going to keep harping about, because I think I should and I have to, and it's unfortunate that I have to. I would hope that the mayor would appreciate, you know, having representation from our side of town, understand and value what our people have to bring to the table, because he also represents them, not just the East End. So I see the East End on everything. I mean, I've never seen a board where there's not a representation from the East End at all. And my family's originally from the Hill District. My father was from Squirrel Hill. My mother was from Ohio. They married and moved to the Hill District, and then when they lost their home for the arena, they moved to Fifth Avenue. And so I'm very familiar with that area. I would never think that I could go back and represent that area. You know, even though, God knows, I represented Councilwoman Warwick's area for a short time, and I couldn't wait for her to get elected and sworn in, because I was council president at the time, and that's when Corey O'Connor, you know, moved on. So it was vacant for a little bit. But I mean, I know that they also, you know, deserve their representation and have a lot of. They pay a lot, you know, to the city of Pittsburgh. They do a lot for the city of Pittsburgh. And they also, you know, struggle and have challenges with living with universities and all the and hospitals and all the things that are associated with that. I understand that they go through a lot too, and they deserve their representation, but we just want ours too. So I really think all boards and authorities should have north, south, east, west, and central, similar to the city of Pittsburgh school districts, and that's what they do. And I used to work for the school district too. So I think that it would be great to see that type of representation. So my anger and my frustration is not with any of you. I'm impressed with what you know and the knowledge and the help that you bring to the residents, and you know, I think the world of you. So it has nothing to do with any of you, but it does have something to do with my district and the lack of representation on a board or authority, and the one time we have somebody, you're going to dismiss them and take them, remove them. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's a question I can ask you that you have not already addressed.
So I told them to put their feet up.
So I want to thank you all for your willingness to serve. I do know of all of you all's longstanding commitment to this work. I'll simply articulate what I believe two critical things that are, in my words, but I believe you all articulated, which was that one, when we have new leadership, that you all want to ensure that that leadership is never disconnected from the people they actually serve. And I think that's critical for this authority. And then secondly was that you want to center residents in all levels of decision making, which is also critical. And so I thank you all for that. I thank you for your commitment to the city, commitment to housing, and more importantly, the commitment to the residents themselves. With that, having exhausted the business of this hearing, we are adjourned.